Hello, I'm Olly and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, intriguing 70s rural horror. I'm talking about The Auctioneer by Joan Samson. So this is the kind of book that I love. It's basically a lost book. So this is a book that originally came out in the early 70s, had quite a big release, so it came out in hardcover. There was a bit of publicity around it when it came out. Joan Samson was an author who the publisher thought might be the next big thing. It had a paperback release and there was a movie version in the works at one point as well. And then sadly, Joan Samson died and therefore didn't write any other books. The movie version fell through and the book just kind of fell out of print. It stopped being published and became a book that people kind of remembered. So a book that, a fair number of people had read and probably spoke to each other about it because it's a really intriguing book. But it wasn't actually available in print until it was picked up in the Paperbacks From Hell line a few years ago and republished. And that's the edition I read with a fantastic foreword by Grady Hendrix. So I love books like that. I love books that just kind of disappear. I find something really interesting about the transitory nature of publication. We tend to think of books as being, like really important things, particularly for us book lovers. We adore books. They mean a lot to us. And we think, we feel like they should be always available, but publishing is a business. And so there are always books like The Auctioneer that just kind of vanish and get forgotten about. And this is the kind of book you don't even see in secondhand bookshops anymore because it's too old. There were loads of really big writers in the early 70s who were, like multi-million-dollar bestsellers whose books you just don't see anymore. Someone like Arthur Haley, who wrote Airport, that kind of inspired the wave of airline-based disaster movies in the 70s. His books are still in print, but you never see them anywhere. So yeah, I really, really enjoy this kind of book. And I think The Auctioneer is a really interesting example of it because it's marketed as a horror book and it definitely has kind of horror elements to it. But it's something quite different from most 70s horror. It does tap into that kind of rural, the rural themes that came out in 70s horror. So things like Harvest Home by Thomas Tryon, movies like The Wicker Man. There was that, kind of a big wave of folk horror. I guess in the wake of, a kind of Summer of Love and things like that in the 70s, people getting into that style of horror that talked about nature and about the environment and about farming and things like that. So it does kind of tap into that a bit. But actually the book it reminded me of most was Population 1280 by Jim Thompson, which is a crime novel. And I'll come on to why that is in a little bit. But first, let me tell you what the book is about. So it's about a small town called Harlow, which is in New Hampshire. And one of the things that's interesting about the book is while you are told that it is set in New Hampshire, it kind of felt to me as a non-American like it was set in a just kind of like a perfect idyllic rural America, somewhere that could be pretty much anywhere in the middle of the state. So definitely not set on one of the coasts. Definitely not like a city-based book, but feels like a book that occupies that expanse at the centre of America. And the other thing that's interesting about it is whilst it is set in the 70s, it feels really, really timeless. It feels like it could have been set any time from like the 20s or 30s onwards, really. You don't get a great sense of the time period in which it's set in. It's being compared to The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And I think that has a similar sense of timelessness to it. You don't really know when The Lottery is set. And I certainly didn't feel like I had a really good grasp on when The Auctioneer was set either. So anyway, it's set in this small town and it focuses really on one family in that town and their reaction to the events of the book. And what happens in the book is this strange guy turns up in town, a guy called Pearly Dunsmore, who is an auctioneer. So he's a really charismatic guy. He kind of rolls into town. He sweeps people along with his enthusiasm. He gives big, long kind of political style speeches and things like that. And he gradually gains a power over the town. And what he does, as the title of the book suggests, is he persuades people to put things up for auction. So it starts off with kind of knickknacks they've got around the house, you know, kind of maybe items of, you know, kind of antiques and things like that. He persuades them to put them up for auction, and gradually, you know, he takes a cut and he earns more and more money over the course of the book and uses that to build a power base for himself. But right from the start, you know there's something slightly sinister about him. There's something weird about him. There's something slightly off-putting. But the thing about the book is when Pearlie Dunsmore is on the page is when it really comes to life. He's a beautifully, beautifully crafted character. I found his sections of the book absolutely fantastic to read. There's a real... like his kind of oration and things like that really brings you along, and you can really see why the townspeople are swept up in what he's doing, despite the fact that you know there is dodgy stuff going on as well. As the book progresses, he kind of builds up a bit of a police force for himself and things like that. So there's definitely something strange and unusual about him. And there's a sense in the book of almost something slightly metaphysical, like, you know, perhaps he is the devil or something like that. It's never explicitly stated, but you definitely get that sense all the way through the book. And that's why it reminded me of Population 1280 by Jim Thompson. So that has a similar rural setting. In that case, I think it's in one of the southern states. And it has this central character in that book, a sheriff, at the centre of the book, who is, again, just a really fascinating character to read and to watch, you know, to watch the events of the book that are instigated by that character, to watch them unfold. And again, there's something almost slightly otherworldly about the character at the centre of Population 1280. That's something that's quite common in Jim Thompson's books. Whilst he tends to be thought of as like a hard-boiled crime writer, there's something else going on in his books which is quite unsettling and weird, and you get that same sense of weirdness in The Auctioneer. It's a really, really fascinating book, and I'm very, very pleased that it's back in print again. I can see why it's a book that lots of people will have remembered reading, because it's not really like anything else. As I said, it was marketed as a horror book, and it has elements of horror to it. There's definitely some kind of chilling parts to it. But it feels more like a kind of weird general fiction style of book, a book with a bit of a message in its back pocket that gradually comes into view as the book progresses. So I enjoyed it enormously. We read it as the book club pick for my CriminOlly book club this month, or last month rather, and I know that a number of the people who read it really enjoyed it as well. It's a really intriguing and fascinating book. It's a book I think will linger with me for some time. So unlike some of the other Paperbacks from Hell re-releases, which are, you know, kind of fairly cheesy, trashy horror, a kind of thing clearly that I absolutely love, this feels like something with a little bit more depth to it, and I definitely recommend checking it out. So those are my thoughts on The Auctioneer by Joan Samson. If you've read it, please let me know in the comments what you thought of it. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.